89.3. Tonight we'll hear from the two finalists for mayor, Councilmembers Jacque Robinson and Terry Tornek. They were the top two vote-getters in last month's election. The runoff between them is Tuesday, April 21st, 2 weeks from today. Many of tonight's questions have been submitted by residents and by local groups. Given our time restrictions, I wasn't able to include all of the questions that came in from the community, but I've got a lot of them. They're a very heavy percentage of our questions to be asked of our candidates tonight. You can also tweet during the debate, whether you're watching at home or whether you're here in our audience at the Pasadena Convention Center. Our hashtag to tweet about the debate is Pasadena Mayor 2015. Hashtag Pasadena Mayor 2015 to connect with your fellow debate watchers. In an effort to keep our debate paced and conversational, each candidate will have a minute to respond to our questions. After each candidate responds, I may follow up to go deeper into our conversation. But right now, let's bring our two candidates. They are, again, Councilmembers Terry Tornek and Vice Mayor of Pasadena and Councilmember Jacque Robinson. Let's give them a hand. And we had a coin toss before we got started as to the order of who's going to go first and who's going to give the final closing statement for our debate tonight. But let's start right out. First question goes to Councilmember Robinson. $6.4 million was allegedly embezzled by a former city employee from a Pasadena Water and Power account. The money in the account is collected from ratepayers to fund the moving of utilities. Pay $120 that. I don't know if you live in Pasadena, pay on your utility bills, but we all see that $120 or something like that every year. We can't help noticing as well that few utility lines have actually gone underground in the city of Pasadena. So my first question for you, Councilmember Robinson, before the scandal, did you ever ask where all the money was going that was being collected by this fund and that we all saw in our bills, but no lines were going underground?
Thank you for the question, and thank you to all of you for being here with us this evening. No, I did not ask that question, and actually I am not a member of the Finance Committee, and in fact there are more than 130 funds that are part of the finance and city budget. And as policymakers, we are not involved in the day-to-day. However, I too am very concerned about the embezzlement that has taken place, and I was equally outraged and disappointed by learning of the news and knowing that a single city employee has had the ability to tarnish the city in such a significant way. I think it's important to acknowledge that it's happened, which I have done, and I have been very supportive of the recent ad hoc committee that was appointed by the mayor, as well as of the citizen committee, as well as the ad hoc committee that's been appointed of members of the city council. None of either of us as candidates are appointed to that committee, but I think it's going to be important moving forward to let the community know that I'm committed, both as current vice mayor and as council member, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Councilmember
Tornek, did this account ever hit your radar?
Yes, I do serve on the Municipal Services Committee, and we had been asking questions about that fund, and it was in fact the questions raised at that committee meeting that ultimately led to the discovery of the scandal. I think that the program is a very complicated program that we had been on our radar for quite a long time. We were in the process of trying to reform it when we came to the questions that ultimately led to the investigation and the discovery. This evening, just before the debate, I came from a meeting in the basement of City Hall of the Task Force on Financial Administration and Internal Controls, and that's the citizen group of experts that is studying our internal controls and the accounting procedures that are in place and that need to be changed so that we can assure the citizens that this kind of thing won't happen again.
I understand that this is a city manager form of government and that the council members aren't the professional managers. But whether you're sitting on that committee or not, and you've got one of the very few things that you are collecting a separate fee, that's a pretty hefty one, from residents, how is it that there was not a sense that the size of that account didn't match the receipts that were coming in from people's power bills?
Well, your premise is not exactly correct, because there are a number of undergrounding projects that have been completed. There's one on Hill Avenue that's underway right now.
Avenue 64 was done.
Avenue 64 was done. I mean, there are a whole series of them. But in fact, the program is one of the most complicated programs that the city undertakes, because before the project can be completed, every homeowner has to attach. And so if you have 70 homeowners in the district, it's really 70 projects, not one project. And so I think this is, the program did get too big, and frankly, the Department of Public Works and the Department of Water and Power were not capable of spending all the money in the account.
But it sounds like you're saying this was really on staff, that the council didn't have a role. Is that your position?
Yes.
Councilmember Robinson, is that your position, that the council had no role to catch this? It was totally up to staff?
I believe that the council has a role in that every single person in City Hall, from the city manager on down, inclusive of the council members, have a certain degree of responsibility for this happening. But in terms of the specifics and knowing, when, where, why, and how, the city council is in the process of receiving all of that information. And I know that the question has been asked in forums past and just ongoing throughout the community of whether or not the city manager should be fired. And my position at the current time is that the best decisions are made when all of the information is received and had an opportunity to be fully vetted. And the city council has not received that information, but if it should come to that, I'm fully prepared to make that type of hard decision as mayor and as council member.
Can you give me one example of a very specific thing, a financial protocol that you think would have kept this from happening, that the city should have enacted, and that if you're elected mayor, you would assure is enacted?
Well, if you read the audit, which is online for the public to read, you will see that it's not for lack of protocols that this occurred. It happened over a span of 11 years, and it's because the many policies that were part of both the finance department and the public works department was not followed. And so it's not a matter of simply just adding additional protocols. It's a matter of making sure that employees trained are in fact following the protocols that are on the books.
Councilmember Tornek, first of all, do you agree with that assessment, that this was not a lack of protocols, it was a lack of people following the protocols?
I think that's largely true. It's not really just a matter of protocols, it's a matter of what they call internal controls. And I think there's a misconception about what audits do and what protocols or internal controls do. And one of the things that we've learned, sadly, from this event is that we've relied too much, really, on audits, and thinking that if the audit gives us a clean bill of health, which we get every year, in fact, we've won awards for our financial statements, that will give us the level...
Do you give them back now?
I'm sorry?
Do you give them back now?
No, because, I mean, that's the irony. We haven't gotten that letter yet, but the irony is that the financial statements were correct, everything looked clean, we got a clean bill of health, but the audits only establish that you've got these internal controls in place, and they do very small sampling to determine if these internal controls are actually being implemented correctly.
Okay, so I just want to clarify, are you both saying that this was just a systemic, multiple human failures, and it would seem there's got to be some sort of systemic way to avoid having multiple people missing something as significant as $6.4 million walking out the door? Councilmember Robinson, there is nothing aside from hiring better people that would have solved this?
Again, I believe it's on a long-term basis, making sure that protocols are in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And again, that means being doubly sure that protocols that are already in place are being followed. We can have all the manuals.
How do you do that, though? How do you make sure those protocols are being followed?
Well, one, it's the function of the city manager, because again, we're policymakers and we do not, directly supervise city employees, but it's making sure that the city manager knows the expectations of him, which he in turn has to convey to his department heads. And in this instance, I think it was the right thing to do to release the finance department manager and the public works department manager. And again, we're still in the process of receiving a lot of information related to the embezzlement and who else may or may not have been involved, and so there's still work yet to be done.
Councilmember Tornek, you want to say quickly,
on that, because I think that this scandal is more of a symptom than it is a specific problem. It's symptomatic of the fact that there isn't adequate accountability in City Hall, that we have a culture in City Hall where people, although I think the employees are mostly trying to do a good job, there has been a lack of accountability, and there are no consequences if you don't follow the rules. So when that happens on a long-term basis, it erodes the effectiveness of these protocols. And so people, I'm not trying to instill a culture of fear in the building. I was a city employee, I was a department head. But I understand that people have to be accountable for their actions, and if they don't follow the rules and they're not doing their jobs actively and accurately, there need to be consequences for that.
Okay, I wanted to ask you quickly because Councilmember Robinson said that she would be open to firing the city manager depending on what information comes back from the full analysis of the embezzlement. What do you think about firing the city manager? Should he keep his job?
Oh, I think that is something we need. We need to wait for the results of these 3 investigations before we reach a conclusion on that.
What would for you be a firing offense in the conclusions of that?
I think that if it's hard to speculate because I think it's the totality of the investigation that's important. But if it becomes clear that his leadership failed in a whole series of ways, then I think he should be held accountable. That's something, you know, the city manager serves at the pleasure of the council. It's one of the few things that we actually have direct responsibility for. And I'm very confident we're going to have a new council after May 4th, one way or another. And I think that council will be very interested in reading the results and doing a fair job in terms of assessing the city manager.
So you think it's not just enough that the city manager had people working down the line from him who missed something this major? Because we know that happened. That's not enough to fire him. It would have to be something deeper and more systemic than that.
Yeah, I think it calls into question the whole leadership style and how he holds his executive leadership team responsible.
Councilwoman Robinson, quick closing comment on this.
I agree that it's not just this single. In determining whether or not the city manager should be fired in the future, I think it's going to be a full council discussion of not just this embezzlement issue, but all of the issues citywide. The city manager is not just responsible for the finance department and the public works department. The city manager is responsible for the entire city. So it's, you know, pretty much every issue that we're going to discuss here tonight and more. And I think we have to make that decision on a grand scope and not just looking at it in the singular.
Moving on, the Pasadena Police Department recently received 2 critical independent audits. One of them criticizes officer tactics in the confrontation with unarmed Kendrick McDade, who was shot and killed by police 3 years ago. The other review concluded that some homicide detectives were barely trained, poorly supervised, leading to serious mistakes and legally questionable practices. Covered a number of cases between 2005 and 2009. I begin with you on this one, Councilmember Tornek. Are you confident that these problems have been fixed, or are there still specific ways the department needs to improve its training and oversight?
No, I'm not confident that they've been fixed. I think, you know, this is part of a larger national dialogue that we're having about what we expect from our police. We have a very sort of ambiguous, almost a schizophrenic attitude about our policemen and how they should conduct themselves. On the one hand, we demand that they keep us safe. On the other hand, we expect perfection from them, which I don't think is reasonable. So I think we have a lot of work to do in the police department in terms of both what the Veritas study proved and what the OIR report demonstrated. This is going to be an ongoing dialogue. We have bad morale in that department. The police are very dissatisfied with their pay situation. We're understaffed. So the police department is one of the critical areas that we're going to have to address very quickly. And I think that these reports and the critique, while justified in some ways, adds to the complexity of this problem.
Councilmember Robinson.
I agree. There are some systematic issues within the department, and both of those reports spelled out what those issues are, and not just what the issues are, but what the police chief and the department as a whole is doing to correct some of those issues. And it is an ongoing process, and I'm encouraged, even though the information was very astonishing and disheartening, I'm encouraged by the fact that Police Chief Sanchez has taken steps, even before the report was complete, to remedy some of the issues that were brought forward in the report. I do believe that we have a fine police department, and that's evidenced by not just comments from the community, but also external awards that the department has won as well. And I very much believe in the community policing model that we have here in the city, although it's very clear as well that there are some portions of this community that continue to have communication issues with the police department and certain individual officers. And I believe that we have to address that, both in terms of those singular officers, because I do disagree with some of the blanket statements that have been made with regard to the department as a whole being corrupt.
Well, let me follow up with you, and then I'll come back with Mr. Tornek. What, to your knowledge, has been done to retrain homicide detectives to make sure that they don't make the same egregious mistakes that this independent audit said they did over that 5-year period?
Well, again, as Commander Perez outlined in the presentation that he gave to the Public Safety Committee a couple weeks ago, there were issues that were identified as they were going through the report with the Veritas Group in order to receive information, and they did indicate that steps have been made. Again, it's an ongoing process. I'm not saying here tonight that everything outlined in the report has been rectified.
But you don't have the specifics on what retraining they're getting, it sounds like.
I don't have specifics standing
But you're
here right
confident
now.
it's happening?
I'm confident that it's happening. We did have the report at the Public Safety Committee, and again, I don't have the full report here in front of me, but I'm confident that steps have been made and are continuing to be made, and in fact, there are 2 remaining issues that were in the report that's going to be coming back to the Public Safety Committee.
Mr. Tornek, you're not confident that it's been implemented?
No, I'm not confident, in part because we don't have the report. I mean, the full report has been referenced. The council doesn't have the full report. You don't have the full report. The full report hasn't been released. We have a practice in this city of, for a variety of reasons, of not being able to or releasing full reports, not just to the public, but the council. So that, what we got was an executive summary. I have really no idea whether or not these various corrections have been made. I do think that they were making corrections as was indicated during the course of these findings, and frankly, part of what's relatively incomprehensible to me in reading this summary of the report, with really an executive summary, is that it makes reference to the fact that certain things are in the process of being repaired, certain things have been repaired. It's not clear to me exactly what has been fixed and what hasn't. So, absent the ability to read more of the report, I'm not sure any of us can be confident about what reforms have been implemented.
Yes, Ms. Robinson, you wanted to quickly say something on that?
I was just going to add that in terms of the council having limited access to information, much like the community, I think it's incumbent upon the next mayor and the city manager to ensure that the consultants that we utilize for not just instances like this, but officer-involved shootings, which the McDade report is currently held in court right now, that we direct whoever the consultant is not to write the report in such a way that it's written with personnel information included, because that's what precludes the full report from being released to the public and in fact the city council. And I think that's well known by the consultants when they're hired. And so I really don't personally understand why a consultant would even write a report in such a way when they know that the public wants to have the information.
I want to move on to the next question, but it is about the Pasadena Police Department, and I believe I'm starting with Ms. Robinson this time. Should Pasadena create an independent police commission or inspector general to oversee the department and review the police chief? One of the potential advantages would be, unlike members of the Public Safety Committee, you could put people on that committee that would add expertise in law enforcement, in the legal system, in family services, dealing with people with serious mental illness. Might it be advantageous to create an independent citizens panel with those kinds of individuals to oversee the police department? Ms. Robinson.
It could be advantageous, and I agree that there needs to be some type of bridge, whether that's an ombudsman, whether that's a citizen committee, as you said, but there does need to be some type of bridge that can work between the community and the police department. I know that Chief Sanchez and myself, as the chair of the Public Safety Committee, has implemented a number of steps like revising the police the report that the public is able to fill out, making it more available throughout the community. But yet and still, there still seems to be this concern that the department is not transparent, that there's not enough outlets for community members to be able to voice their concerns. So I could be supportive of an ombudsman-like position as a gap between the department and the community, but I think we also need to be realistic about what access to information this citizen group would have. Because again, even though public safety is a body, so is the entire city council as a whole, so are the numerous commissions that we have, and I think that the community has to think of those existing bodies as outlets as well.
Quick follow-up, yes or no? Would you think that if there is a commission or an independent commissioner, that they should have subpoena power, that they should be able to bring people in and question them about police practices?
They should have access to whatever information they are legally able to, and it's...
All right, Mr. Tornek.
I look forward to a robust discussion on this issue. My initial reaction, having talked with a lot of folks about this and listened to the ACLU and ACT and other people who have been very active in this discussion, I'm not persuaded that a citizen commission is necessarily the direction to go. And it's surprising because on the whole, I'm a big champion of commissions and boards and have served on them and am a great believer in them. But I think experience indicates in a lot of cities they become very politicized, and I'm not sure it's a useful undertaking. I do think that an inspector general, someone with professional credentials who could serve as an advisor to the Public Safety Committee, which I think is not able to make the kinds of judgments that it should be making on an informed basis, might be the right step. But I think the first step is to do what my colleague, Councilmember Kennedy, has suggested, and that is to have a full discussion on the various alternatives and have the conversation with the community about what they think on the idea.
And just to clarify my understanding, correct me, either of you, if I'm wrong, the Public Safety Committee is a committee of the City Council, so it is essentially the council's, four members. It is the council's responsibility to oversee the police department and to hire, fire, review police chiefs as they come through the city.
We actually do not.
Oh, you do
hire-
not? Who
with-
does?
City manager
City
hires.
manager does
The
that.
city,
Who is hired, fired, and reviewed by the council. So that's, all right.
I
Let's,
was just going to briefly
Yeah.
add that, in fact, this has been discussed more than 3 times at the Public Safety Committee, and at least once that I can think of with the City Council as a whole, and there has not been an appetite for it. We all know we have to count to 5 for City Council, and thus far, there has not been the appetite to move that discussion forward by 5 members of the City Council.
I think the appetite is growing.
the first of our community questions comes from a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and that chamber member says, those most concerned about increasing the minimum wage up to $15 an hour, which has been proposed for Pasadena and neighboring cities, those most concerned are restaurants, retailers, home health care providers, and nonprofits. They're concerned it could decrease jobs and the hours of employees, and that it could hit young people hard who are looking for summer jobs. Question beginning with you, Mr. Tornek. Do you think increasing Pasadena's minimum wage, perhaps up to $15 an hour, would have that kind of effect on employment?
I think it might. This is another one of those issues that needs to be fully discussed. I am supportive of the concept of increasing the minimum wage. I think that the notion that that people can support a family on $18,000 a year is nonsensical. Even 2 people working can't accomplish that. I think we need to pay attention to what happens in Los Angeles. That would be a good benchmark as a starting point. I've been meeting with restaurateurs. I've had a number of meetings which have been very contentious. And small businesses to talk about this issue. And I'm pretty confident that we can craft an ordinance that would make sense for Pasadena and as part of a more regional approach. Not every community in Los Angeles County will adopt an increased minimum wage. But I'm pretty confident that the City of Los Angeles and the County of Los Angeles will. And once that happens, I think Pasadena will not suffer an important competitive disadvantage.
Councilmember Robinson?
Yes, I have been on record as stating that I do support both the discussion and hopefully eventual passage of a citywide minimum wage. I do believe, though, that we are at the very beginning stages of those discussions. There has only been a few community meetings, and the business community has not been involved, to my knowledge, in a very deep way yet, so those discussions still remain. But I don't believe that Pasadena necessarily has to wait for City of LA or other cities to craft their proposals. Pasadena is on a world stage. We're a progressive city, and that's one of the reasons why I'm running for mayor. And I believe that we can lead the way, and we have a Pasadena preferred alternative for everything from the 710 tunnel proposal or alternative to the Cajamonga sediment removal project from LA County, and I don't think this necessarily has to be anything different. We have a lot of smart individuals and organizations here in Pasadena, and I do believe that it's something that we can craft to where it's going to be successful and beneficial and come out ahead in terms of both the business community and the people that we are aiming to help in the city.
What convinces you that there wouldn't be a loss of customers to neighboring cities that perhaps wouldn't raise? Glendale, if Arcadia didn't raise it, South Pasadena, what would convince you that Pasadena wouldn't suffer economically with flight to other cities?
Well, we may initially suffer. I'm not saying there won't be any detrimental effects. That yet remains to be seen, but we can't be stagnant and do nothing just because we are worried about what may happen. If it were to pass and we've seen the effects of it, of course it would have to be reanalyzed. But again, there's other cities throughout the country that have been able to implement this, and the city is not falling apart. And I understand that we have neighboring cities in closer proximity than, say, cities like Seattle. But again, LA County is considering this right now, City of Los Angeles is considering this right now, and those are major, government bodies. And so I don't think that Pasadena would be alone in considering this.
Let me flip this around the opposite way, though, Mr. Tornek.
Do I get to answer that part, then?
Well, yeah.
Well, let me just...
Real quickly, but I want to flip
the nature of our
that.
employment base it does not subject itself to the kind of employment flight that you're suggesting. The major employers in Pasadena, the Huntington Hospital, the educational institutions, most of the restaurants are not going to pick up and relocate to Glendale or Arcadia.
You anticipated my question, so that was exactly what I was going to write. No, that's good. Let's see, from the West Pasadena Residents Association, how will you vote on the 710 freeway tunnel proposal at Monday night's council meeting here at the convention center? Is it Mr. Tornek? Is your turn to lead off? Go ahead.
Yeah, I made the suggestion that led to the formation of the task force to come up with a Pasadena preferred alternative to the tunnel. I think the tunnel is a bad idea. It doesn't stand that it doesn't even achieve what it purports to achieve in terms of really reducing congestion. What it does is shift the traffic jam from one location to another, has a whole series of horrific environmental consequences. There's a committee that is going to make its report on Monday night to the City Council in terms of the outlines of a Pasadena preferred alternative. I'm very supportive of that. I've read their report, and I think they're on the right track to coming up with something that we can be for, not just something that we can be against.
So it sounds like, though, when it comes to the tunnel, you're clearly against it. You would vote against that.
No, I am against the tunnel, and I'm personally opposed to the tunnel. I don't think that Measure A allows the City Council to vote against the tunnel.
This Measure A was passed by Pasadena residents, and it calls for support of the completion of the 710 from where it ends at California up to the 210
But
freeway.
what it does is it prohibits the City Council from voting against the completion of the freeway.
Okay. And Ms. Robinson, the same question for you. How will you vote on the tunnel?
I too am against the proposed tunnel alternative as outlined by Caltrans and Metro. And moving forward, I think it's going to be really important for us to select which alternative is going to best suit the city of Pasadena. And I also want to put it on the record that I was never for the tunnel. What I did say was that we have to be consider all of the residents of Pasadena. And again, I believe that it's bad precedent to be making decisions, as much as we believe that it's going to be a bad thing to be making decisions without the full information. And now that the EIR is out, we do have that information upon which we can make a decision. I will say, too, that the EIR is very clearly missing the cost-benefit analysis, which I'm sure we all know as well that there is no cost benefit to $1 billion, multiple tens of billions of dollars tunnel, but that is something that's missing from the EIR and the public information that's out right now. And so even though the information is incomplete, I do believe we have enough information upon to make that hopefully what will be a motion opposing it.
For both of you, would you support a ballot measure in Pasadena to reverse the previous vote on the 710 freeway? Councilman Tornek?
I think that is the way to, I think bringing it back to the voters is a good idea. The problem is that the process and the timing would be such that I'm not sure it would be of real value, although if Metro does select the tunnel alternative, the litigation will take it out.
You've got
for so
plenty of
long.
time. There's no, I don't think there's any question about that.
I think
Ms.
there probably
Robinson?
would be enough time.
Putting it to the voters, especially in light of Measure A and C, was something that I suggested the last 2 times that it was in front of the city council when we held the meeting here at the convention center. So that would definitely be something that I could be supportive of. And that could still happen even in the face of the city council taking a position itself.
This is from a resident on social media who asked this question. More pedestrians and bicyclists are hit by cars on Pasadena streets than the vast majority of similar-sized California cities. I can't vouch for the accuracy of that, but it sounds like someone who studied this who asked the question. What would you do as mayor to reduce the risk? Councilmember Robinson.
Well, I believe that we're already working towards that end with the bike master plan, and also making sure that we have sufficient multimodal methods of traveling throughout Pasadena. I think we all know that, you know, the streets and the roads are for everyone, and the Complete Streets Coalition has been working hard to educate the public and help them know that, you know, the road is not just for cars, it's for bicyclists, it's for pedestrians, and so I'm very supportive of that and would continue to be supportive of that as mayor.
Are you supportive of what they call road diets, where lanes are taken from cars to be used, designated for bicycles?
Yes, of course, provided that we have the complete information, because once you, of course, we know traffic is like water, so once you take away lanes, it's going to go somewhere, and so we have to be mindful that it may not necessarily always have a positive impact.
But you're open to that. Councilmember Tornek?
I think that's the perfect question because everyone is in favor of multimodal transportation and slowing traffic, and until you get to the point where you actually have to remove a lane and people start calling you in the middle of the night asking you if you've lost your mind. So that I think that we are headed, this complete streets concept, which is now state law, that forces cities to understand that streets are not just for moving cars, but for moving pedestrians and bicycles and other modes of transportation, does give us a real leg up, because we will, all of us, learn to view the way our street network operates in a different way. But making that and I do support a series, and have supported a series of road diets. We're talking about parklets now on Colorado Boulevard. I've been working with the Playhouse District Association for 2 years, meeting with them on a monthly basis and talking about this. When it finally becomes public, I mean it is public, but when it finally comes to the council for action, I anticipate there'll be great resistance to that idea.
Would you support Colorado Boulevard losing a lane of car traffic to make it more bicycle and pedestrian friendly?
Yeah, that is the proposal.
Okay. Do you support that, Ms. Robinson?
I believe it's something that we should consider.
What are your qualms?
Again, when you remove a lane, the number of cars is not going to go anywhere. So there's either going to be more cars traveling down the street in a single lane, which will create more traffic, or they're going to move to other streets. And so we have to be mindful of that as we implement these, you know, new ideas.
So just factually, to expand on that, the reason that this proposal is coming forward is because there is capacity on adjacent one-way streets north and south of Colorado Boulevard. So if it's not going to work there, it won't work anywhere.
Because you got Union and Green that would be able to cover that.
And the delay that's anticipated is on the order of 2%.
All right. From a resident on social media, do you favor raising the hotel bed tax to raise more money for a variety of social services? Mr. Tornek.
I don't think so. I think we've already got, when you look at the total, it's been suggested by a variety of people, and when I checked with the city manager, when you look at the total taxation package that applies to the TOT and other franchise taxes that are placed on Pasadena hotels, we're already at the max in terms of what's available in the region. The hospitality industry is one of our great opportunities in Pasadena to create jobs, to support new restaurants, and really create jobs at all levels, from high wage levels down to minimum wage level. And I think we want to be very careful not to slow the development of that growth sector of our economy.
Ms. Robinson.
I believe it's something that we consider. However, I think we also need to be mindful that the city finds itself in a very precarious position right now because of the embezzlement. And I don't believe it's going to be possible to ask taxpayers for additional tax money at this point in time while we're trying to work towards improving transparency and ensuring the public that the city is in fact going to be responsible with their tax dollars. And so in terms of hiking the taxes, whether it's for the new hotels that we're going to have in the pipeline or otherwise, I think it's something that we can consider, but again, we have to think about that in the context of the environment in which we find ourselves right now in Pasadena. And even though we have very limited sources of generating revenue in the city right now, I think before we look at that, we should also look at something like adding an additional minor fee to Rose Bowl ticket sales. We know that we have a number of events that are ongoing at the Rose Bowl, and I think that's probably a better option in which to try to generate some additional revenue for much needed social services in the city.
Speaking of which, as a radio guy, I just have to forward promote, we're going to get to the Rose Bowl later. I'm sure many of you are interested in hearing about that. This is from the organization Innovate Pasadena. As mayor, would you champion tax or other incentives to attract innovation businesses to Pasadena, tech, biotech, the like, some sorts of tax relief to attract those kinds of businesses? I think, Ms. Robinson, you start on this one, if I recall.
I believe we have to be creative going forward in order to attract businesses to Pasadena, but I think alternatively, we have to do a better job of keeping the businesses that we have here in the city, and we're going to do that by continuing to streamline the planning department, making sure that employees have manageable caseloads so that they continue to move projects through the pipeline to completion without very much delay, or at least some of the delays that we've been seeing in years past. Tech is a very hot industry right now, so to speak, and I think we've seen the beginnings of that here in Pasadena. And so I would, as mayor, and again, as current vice mayor and current sitting council member, I do think we have to be creative and think about ways that we can attract new types of industry to Pasadena, but I think we also have to likewise make sure that we're maintaining our existing base here as well.
Mr. Tornek.
I love that idea. Unfortunately, I can't think of a single revenue source that we could reduce that we could afford to do it with.
There aren't any taxes when companies come into the city that you could relieve them from, at least temporarily?
I don't think so. We're confronted, look, I'm chairman of the Finance Committee, and we are barely breaking even here. We have 10 bargaining units, 10 different unions in the city. Most of them haven't had raises in 4 years. They all want more pay, 70% of our budget. We have an unfunded approved capital program with more than $400 million of unfunded projects. We have citizens clamoring to spend $15 million to repair the sidewalks that they don't want to have to fix. We've got, a whole series of demands. I mean, it sounds great. I love the idea, but the notion that we could, and we have to replenish our reserves. We drew down our reserves by more than $20 million over a 5-year period. So given that set of financial circumstances, it's hard for me to imagine finding some place, as much as I admire Innovate Pasadena and Andy Wilson, I think it's hard to see where we'd find the money.
From the Pasadena Foothills Association of Realtors, the question comes, in what areas of the city is it appropriate or most appropriate to encourage greater development? Mr. Tornek?
Downtown.
That's it. That's the
No,
only
I
area.
think there are some other areas. I mean, the general plan is pretty specific about where additional high-density development should be. The whole premise of the development pattern in Pasadena is that we need to protect our single-family neighborhoods, not intrude on them, not destroy them, not damage them. We will have additional growth in this city, and the place to accommodate it is downtown and proximate to the freeway. There are some areas in East Pasadena, I think, that could accommodate some growth. We have a pretty well-developed general plan, which we're in the process of amending, which specifies areas adjacent to the freeways and in the downtown area where high-density development should be encouraged.
And you think the general plan has the level of development right? You think the numbers for units developed is what it should be?
We're tweaking the numbers now. I mean, that will be the most interesting aspect of completing our work on the general plan in the next 6 months. But I think generally speaking, the numbers are good.
Ms. Robinson, where would you like to see the most amount of new development in Pasadena?
Well, as mayor, one of my priorities is going to be making sure that what I call underserved areas of the city, make sure they get the attention they need. I do believe that south of the freeway, we are at our limits of what should be allowed, and those opportunities have not had a chance to extend south of the freeway, in my opinion. I've lived in Pasadena my whole life, and I feel like there's certain areas of the city, like Northwest, like East Pasadena, that could stand to have extra attention to the neighborhoods and the business corridors of those areas, like Lincoln Avenue, East Washington. If you lived in Pasadena for any amount of time, I think you know that the city took an intensive, specific, focused effort on improving, South Lake, Playhouse District, and Old Town, and I believe that type of effort is going to have to be made as well for south of the freeway, not to the detriment north of the freeway, not to the detriment of south of the freeway, because very clearly there are, empty storefronts and other issues, but I do believe that we have to have a focused effort for underserved areas of the city.
Traffic, as you know, has been an increasing problem in Pasadena. It used to be you could drive one end of the city to the other. It would just take you a few minutes. Some days during rush hour, it'd take you half an hour to get from one end of Pasadena to the other. Los Angeles invested huge amounts of money in synchronizing their traffic signals. They have a big traffic operations center looking at all their major intersections so that they can override and control the signals even manually. Is it reasonable and possible that Pasadena, for quality of life and traffic flow issues, could make a big investment in synchronizing all signals, going to live operations during rush hours of intersections? Would that make sense, Ms. Robinson?
Again, it would make sense, but again, traffic is a regional issue, and I think there's many reasons why we have the traffic in the city, not the least of which is Pasadena is a popular city. We know that the 210 is now backed up anytime after pretty much 1 p.m. these days. And even though you cited City of Los Angeles and their traffic synchronization, I would probably disagree with you based on my own driving experience in Los Angeles. But again, I think that a lot of ideas, Pasadena, I love the fact that Pasadena, we're a model city because we're big enough, but we're small enough. And so we do have the ability to be creative, and perhaps synchronizing signals in a more efficient way is one of those.
Mr. Tornek.
We have a fairly robust traffic signalization system. It may not...
It does not appear so.
It doesn't, well, it may not appear so, but it also, a lot of the traffic is not as intense as what you're describing in Los Angeles. The kind of live monitoring system that you're talking about is probably not warranted. We have hotspots. We know what they are. Some of them relate to the Gold Line surface crossings, which are the ones I experience most often. And the way to fix that is to grade separate those intersections the way they should have been to start with. It's my hope that instead of building a freeway tunnel, we can get some of that money and separate those grade crossings at California and at Glen Arm Del Mar probably not, because I don't think the geometry will work anymore because of the housing project, but I do think that we have some opportunities like that, but a whiz-bang kind of live operator traffic signalization system is probably not warranted here.
All right. From Affordable Housing Services and the Greater Pasadena Affordable Housing Group, they ask almost all condo developers pay fees in lieu of providing affordable units in their buildings. Should the fees, they ask, be increased to the point where those developers actually build affordable housing units instead of just make the payment to the city? Councilman Tornek.
The fees are pretty stiff now, and frankly, the notion that it's preferable to build the units in place, I think, is not correct. I think it's much more efficient to take those in lieu fees and buy existing housing and maintain those as affordable housing. It costs $600,000 or $700,000 a unit to build an affordable unit. And if you have a limited number of in lieu fees, it's much more efficient to take those dollars and invest them in protecting existing units as affordable housing rather than building new affordable units, new housing units. I just don't think that makes any sense.
Ms. Robinson.
I sit on the Economic Development and Technology Committee, and we've had a number of studies and reports presented to us in terms of where Pasadena falls on the scale of our fees compared to other cities. And at this point in time, I don't think we can afford to increase fees because we already are one of the highest fee cities. But I do think that we have to be more creative about how we're going to maintain and increase the affordable housing stock here in Pasadena. And of course, funding is at the crux of pretty much any decision of the city council, but we do have some tools, even though some may believe that they won't be as impactful as we hope they would, like lowering threshold for the second unit ordinance so that more people can take advantage of the program if they wish to, and also making sure that for the existing affordable units that we have in the city, that we're able to retain that. And the city is making an effort right now, which I'm supportive of in terms of our first-time homebuyers program that we had in the past, making sure that we maintain our first right of refusal for those units if they happen to have to go out into the open market because the homeowners can't afford it any longer.
So just to clarify, make sure I understand, are you saying you agree with Mr. Tornek that taking the money from these in lieu fees could go toward purchasing housing that already exists? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that's one of the methods, but there's many.
Okay. You also mentioned allowing under the current ordinance for second units, they're sometimes called granny flats, to be behind a current house to be constructed. Obviously, there are some people who don't like that idea. What would you say to those who would say that's going to change the character of our single-family neighborhoods?
Well, I would say that there's nothing currently on record that points to that would happen because, again, the ordinance as it's currently written has been totally unusable. There's only been about 3 units that have been even contemplated, and none of them were ever even built. And so my practice as a member of the city council has not been to buy into, what's the word I'm looking for? Buy into possibly over-exaggerations of what can happen. I believe that we have to at least try and then reanalyze whatever the ordinance or the action is if it seems like it's being detrimental to the community.
Your opinion of that additional unit?
I think the strategy is saying something hasn't been successful, so let's change it to make sure that it works better, but it won't work, so it doesn't really pose a threat is a puzzle to me. When we got into this discussion about the granny flats, the second unit ordinance, one of the immediate concerns was and I quite agree that the threshold, the minimum lot size should be changed. It is too big. It requires too big a lot. But one of the things we immediately got into is how would we limit the number of granny flats if we were successful in a community so it didn't change the character of our single-family neighborhoods. So it's not a sort of a make-believe problem. If you do have a successful program, you have to contemplate what the impacts of that program might be. And in this instance, I don't think we want to create a monster in terms of encouraging people to start building granny flats everywhere and then say, whoa, maybe this is being too successful, we ought to ratchet it back. If we do decide to modify the program, we have to contemplate what the limits would be and what the impacts would be from the beginning.
From the Association of Realtors, do you support rent control? I think, Ms. Robinson, you start on this one. Should there be consideration, should there be rent control in Pasadena?
I have said that we have to be unafraid to have difficult conversations in Pasadena, and rent control is one of them. We're all very clear that the housing market, both rental and home ownership, is very high in Pasadena, and we've seen rent stabilization or rent control as actions that have assisted other communities, though not perfect. But again, in Pasadena, we have a lot of conversations, and I don't think we should limit conversations just based on our fears. And so I think that it's one that we should have, one that we can have, and see where it goes from there.
If you look at another city that has it, say Santa Monica, do you think it works well in other cities that have it? Do you think it would potentially work well or have same problems other cities have with it?
I think it depends on who you ask. If you're a renter, I'm sure they feel it works excellent.
Well, I'm asking what your perception is, though. What do you think?
My perception is that as a renter in Santa Monica, yes, I would feel like it's working there. But again, being a homeowner and being a renter are two totally different things. And even in fact, being a landlord is a different view as well. So that's why I'm saying we have to have the conversation in order to get all of the different viewpoints out on the table.
Mr. Tornek.
Well, I think conversations are great, but I think that my personal attitude is that I'm opposed to rent control. I grew up with rent control. I grew up in New York. That kind of rent control is illegal in California for a reason, because it creates such distortions in the housing market. It winds up destroying the rental housing stock rather than preserving it. It dissuades people from investing in their property. It creates a gigantic bureaucracy that can't be sustained by the city. More than half this city are rental units. Most people think that Pasadena is a homeowner town. More than 50% of the units in Pasadena are rental units. So clearly this is something that could gin up a lot of support, but I think if people understood the implications of rent control, that they would understand it has unintended consequences, that not a path that I would like to trod.
Is there a case to be made, though, that rent control might allow for more diversity in the city? People who have lived here, grown up in Pasadena, might not have to leave for less expensive housing markets, and you could keep a greater mix economically of people?
No, I think that's a fallacious argument. I think that the reality of what the pressures on rents and on housing prices are regional or even national, and I think that the notion that somehow Pasadena could successfully intervene in that rental market and influence or reduce the marketplace setting the appropriate prices is not correct and would be in the long term destructive of our housing stock.
This comes from the West Pasadena Residents Association. The Rose Bowl needs additional revenue to pay off the remodeling costs of the bowl. We're seeing more large-scale events taking place. That has aggravated many residents who live in the greater Arroyo area. Many of us saw today in the Pasadena Star News that there is a tentative agreement, or at least to move forward to talk with AEG about doing a New Orleans Jazz Heritage style festival of music that would appeal to multiple age groups and last perhaps 3 days long, and that might be a better alternative than doing these 1 or 2 at a time concerts in the Rose Bowl. Ms. Tornek, let me ask you first of all, what do you think of the maximum number of events, major events that should be held at the Rose Bowl? And would you support a large-scale music festival like this?
I just have to call you on the sort of premise of the question for a minute. The Rose Bowl does not need additional revenue to pay off the improvements. There's enough revenue for the existing revenue stream with the subsidy from the golf course to pay off the operating expenses and the remodeling costs, the debt service that's already been incurred. I'm chairman of the Finance Committee. We've had the Rose Bowl on our agenda at every single meeting because we're trying to get our arms around what the real numbers are there. And in fact, the only reason that the Rose Bowl might need additional revenue is for future additional capital improvements beyond the $182 million that we spent already, including $8 million worth of seats, which didn't get replaced.
So just to clarify, the many millions of dollars more that were spent than were originally budgeted for that remodeling process,
Covered.
that's been able to be operationalized by the bowl.
It's covered. So the numbers that they've presented us with demonstrate that it's an old building, it needs additional capital improvements over time. There's still deferred maintenance. Not everything was done, including the seats. Not all the tunnels were widened, et cetera, et cetera. So that there is a need for additional revenue. Exactly how much that is what we're trying to get our arms around. At the same time, I support the notion that the RBOC is examining a third tenant rather than the NFL, which I do not support. I've objected to the NFL.
Even on a temporary basis?
Even on a temporary basis. I think it would be catastrophic. And I voted against the EIR. I was the only vote against the EIR on that subject. But the point is that we need to come to some agreement with the neighbors in terms of how many events are appropriate and what it looks like. This music festival is a proposal. I supported the EIR on that one because I think it is a likely candidate for something in lieu of the NFL and to give some certainty to the Rose Bowl in terms of what its income stream will look like.
So just real quickly though, maximum number of events. You're not comfortable choosing a number based on all your conversations with Arroyo area homeowners as to what you think the max should be?
I know that the max should be closer to the 12 that we have in the ordinance today rather than the 18 that we had this past year. And I think we need to have a hard cap so that we don't sort of whimsically change it from year to year.
Ms. Robinson.
I too agree that we should keep the current number of events limited by ordinance, which is 12, with the city council description for no more than a maximum of 2. I think it's been made very clear, both to me as council member for the Rose Bowl, but also the other council members as well, that last summer was overkill in terms of the number of concerts that we had, and I think that was a function of both the number of concerts and also the repetitive nature of them, because some of them were 2 nights, some of them were 3 nights, some of them were, during the week. And so I think for future decisions, inclusive of this music festival, if and when it ever comes to fruition, that we be cognizant and have a plan in order to deal with the neighborhood issues like traffic mitigation, nuisance activity for when the events get out, and other issues.
If you were elected mayor, would you support or not an NFL team playing temporarily in the Rose Bowl while a new stadium was built?
No.
Not at all?
No.
All right. From a resident on social media, what is one of the most difficult decisions you've had to make on the council, and how did you make that decision? And I'd sort of tag along to that. Something that you thought perhaps the majority of your constituents wouldn't support, but you felt was the right thing to do, and so you supported that. Ms. Robinson.
Off the top of my head, I cannot think of an issue, but I will say one of the hardest things that I've
Would you like to take a little break?
one of the hardest things that I've had to do as council member, and it's not something that I talk about a lot. I've been to the site, whether it's officer-involved shootings or not. I've been to the site to every single gun shooting in this city, and that's not something that I talk about, whether it's officer involved or not. It's hard. It's hard to look a mother in her face and tell her that I'm sorry for an action that I didn't personally participate in, but because I'm a member of the city council, I feel like I have a certain responsibility to respond. And as mayor, I will continue to do that, but it's not one of the things that is enjoyable at all. And I think it's something that the entire city council has to address in terms of the gun violence in this city.
Mr. Tornek.
I think most of the difficult issues for me relate to some of the land use decisions. Doesn't have quite the drama of some of the things we deal with, but I think in terms of the long-term impacts on the community and what people react to and how they feel about their city, for me, some of these individual project decisions, how big, too much, not in the right location, those are the ones that and where there's a huge difference of opinion among those in favor and those opposed to these things. These are projects that affect people's quality of life, I mean, where they live every day. And I think when you have a neighborhood group that is opposed to an issue, and you measure that against what you view as the needs of the entire community, whether it's a restroom at Desiderio, where the local neighbors, don't want it, but as a citywide policy, it's important, or whether it's the roving archers in the Arroyo. I mean, these are the kinds of issues where there's intense local feeling about it as measured against the sort of larger public policy issue.
From the Pasadena Chamber of Commerce, how would you increase jobs for Pasadena residents, especially young people? Mr. Tornek.
I think what we need to do is to focus on the areas of employment where we have the greatest opportunities. We talked about hospitality earlier as one of those when you asked the question about increasing the fees on hotels. I think healthcare is another critical area for possible growth. Our educational institutions and innovation. We talked about innovation. Those are the four, I think, pillars of what is going to be our future economy in Pasadena. As we grow those sectors of our workforce, that will open up employment opportunities for youth as well.
Ms. Robinson.
As a member of the City Council, and since I was elected in 2007, youth development and violence prevention has been one of the issue areas that I've taken on, and out of that came the 2020 initiative, and included with the initiative is job development and employment training programs, not necessarily just limited to one-time temporary jobs, but also careers, long-term careers that people can stay in. And one of those has been the apprenticeship preparation program, which has had over 300 graduates to date, and many of them are now working in construction-related fields at journeyman wages where they're able to take care of their families that are well above $15 an hour. And then also I've been one of the biggest advocates on the City Council at growing our Summer Rose program, which is the temporary summer jobs program. It's a program that I participated in as a youth here in Pasadena, and I think it's one where kids and youth have an opportunity to get that first employment experience that they need in order to go out externally outside of the city and be able to look for jobs and have that experience necessary for instances in Old Pasadena and elsewhere. And so I think we have to grow our Summer Rose program. I would love to see it expand to a year-round youth employment program, but again, everything's always in the funding, and that's something that the City Council would have to decide is a priority.
We had a question come in from social media about medical marijuana and a question about dispensaries in the city of Pasadena. Ms. Robinson, do you support Pasadena allowing for specific numbers of medical marijuana dispensaries within the city?
I don't think that it's something that the city of Pasadena would support as a whole, and I think with medical marijuana dispensaries come a number of public safety issues in terms of making sure that they're safe, not just for the community, but for the neighborhoods that they're going to be located in. And I know there are certain measures that we can take to make sure that they're located away from schools, away from child care facilities and things like that, but I don't think that the trade-off would be worth it in terms of whatever revenue might be generated from having them within the city compared against the public safety concerns.
Mr. Tornek.
I think the argument is usually not so much about the revenue to be generated, but the convenience for the people who need the service. We've had, in the past year, we've had two sort of illicit experiences with them, and they have not proved to be successful. So I don't support it.
Not at all. But on the issue of patients who need access or believe they need access, doctors believe that the patients need access, you think it's okay for them to have to go to a neighboring city to visit a dispensary?
I think the trade-off for the community is not effective. Yes.
All right. Ms. Robinson, same for you. You feel like if they have to go to a neighboring city, that's just the way it is?
At this point in time, but again, everything is a conversation, and I'm not one for limiting conversation. A lot of the ordinances and other actions that the city council has taken was a result of someone coming to the city council and presenting it before one of the council committees for further research, and so I wouldn't necessarily exclude, dispensaries as, possibly one of those possibilities.
From the Board of Realtors, mansionization or supersized houses, as some people call them, is a big focus in neighboring cities. Arcadia is going through a tremendous battle over this issue right now. How do you think a property owner's rights should be balanced against the current character of a neighborhood and the size of homes that are there now? How do you weigh those competing interests? Mr. Tornek, I think you're next.
Very carefully. I think that anybody who's seen the building at 747 South Los Robles or the project on Glen Summer and some evolving projects in Linda Vista would say that while we shouldn't intrude too much on private property rights, at a certain point the balance tips, and so the impact of a building, of a monstrous building on a surrounding neighborhood diminishes the value of the surrounding property owners to an extent that just can't be tolerated. So I recommended, and the planning department is now undertaking an analysis of how we need to modify our ordinance to avoid a replication of 747 South Los Robles. I urge all of you to go look at it and reach your own conclusion.
Well, can you be a little more specific, though? I mean, do you think that
I can
the
be
city...
a lot more specific.
Yeah. Do you... not on the ones you don't like, but on the remedy that you see. For example, would you support a city ordinance that says, here's the cap on square footage you can put on a particular size lots? And,
Look, Larry, I was the planning director here. I have a lot of thoughts on this issue. I've met with the planning staff. We have been very reluctant to have design review of single-family homes in this city, but now my colleagues seem to be agreeing that we've reached the point where we need to do that. We just need to be sure that it's not triggered for every small remodel action that someone wants to take. But if someone wants to max out the footprint of a building, if there's a relationship, a disproportionate relationship between the square footage of the second floor to the first floor, there are a variety of triggers that we can put in place so that if you trip one of those wires, you do have to go to design review, and we can avoid the kind of result that we had at 747 South Los Robles.
Can that all be made objective so that there are very clear formulas for that? Or
it cannot be made totally objective.
It has to be project by project based?
The nature of design is fundamentally subjective, and that's the reason we've never been willing to have design review on single-family homes.
So, Ms. Robinson, where do you come down on that? How far would you go in allowing the city to approve individual projects?
I do believe that individual property owners should have the discretion to design how they want to. However, I am also cognizant of the fact that there are multiple locations within the city, not just in District 7 or District 4, where we've seen huge houses go up that are just totally out of the character of the existing neighborhood. So I do believe that there's a balance that can be struck between individual property rights and the city limitations. And I think maybe a good threshold would be if someone is aiming to exceed 55% of the existing house that's there, then that should probably trigger an individual review of the project.
All right. I want to move on to ask you about the police department again. This was a social media question, and I think it was you, Councilman Tornek, who who talked about the staffing issue with the police department earlier, if I'm not mistaken. So this question is along those lines. What level of staffing should the Pasadena Police Department have to provide necessary services to residents? Ms. Robinson?
Well, in practice, there's been approximately 230 or so positions that have been funded within the general fund for the police department, but in practice, only about 200 and I believe it's between 210 and 215 positions have been filled at any one time due to a lot of, due to many factors, not excluding recruitment, making sure that everyone can, everyone that's recruited gets through the complete program of the academy, and both the academy and the trial period before they become full-fledged officers. One of the current issues that we're seeing also involved in that number is the amount of pay, especially as it relates to senior experienced officers, and so that's an issue that the City Council is currently grappling with, so that officers are able to be paid competitively, so that once they're experienced here in Pasadena, they don't feel the need to go to other agencies, and that's something that I'm committed to doing, working in partnership with both the police officers and also the city manager and the rest of the City Council.
Mr. Tornek, optimum level for staffing?
During the budget crunch, we reduced the number of officer slots, I think by 7 or 8. Beyond that, we are not able to hire the full complement of officers that are authorized. So when you combine the reality that we've reduced the force and we can't even fill the slots that we have, we wind up being short-staffed. And I think we need to remedy that. And I think that is going to take, the truth is we've never been at full strength. I don't think we've ever filled the full number of authorized slots. And I think that's typical in most police departments. Los Angeles made a big deal about having 10,000 officers authorized, but they never actually got the full complement of 10,000. So I think we need to approach this in a multifaceted way. We are going to have to improve the compensation, and we're going to have to modify, I think, our hiring practices, because we go through more than 100 applications without for the ratio of 1 trainee, and so I think we're going to have to take a look at that.
A couple of very personal questions for you here as we get close to the end. Councilmember Tornek, one of your council colleagues, Steve Madison, describes you as arrogant with an autocratic style that's marginalized you on the council. Do you think others see you similarly?
I'm not still beating my wife. I mean, what kind of
Do you think other people see you similarly?
I can't speak to that. I can tell you that occasionally, like on the Rose Bowl issue, I was at the losing end of a 7-1 vote. For the most part, I have no trouble working collegially with my other council members. Steve Madison has launched a personal vendetta because I campaigned for as an opponent when he ran for re-election, and so I think his opinion may not be totally dispassionate.
So you feel you have a good working relationship with your colleagues on the council?
I absolutely do.
All right. I won't ask you that, Ms. Robinson. That would just be too cold.
No, I can actually answer the questions.
If you're comfortable answering that. Yeah.
I think, when I look as compared to other cities, I look at our city council here, and my experience over the last 8 years is that we are mostly collegial. We do tend to have an equal number of votes. There have been instances where we've disagreed, but I'm grateful that most of the time we've been able to leave our differences in the council chambers. And, clearly there are personality differences both between myself and Mr. Tornek, as well as other members of the council. And I think that's a good thing. I think that comes from our life experiences and the difference of opinions among the constituents that we serve as well. And so I will say that I believe most of the time we do have a collegial council.
I want to ask you about all the support that you have from organized labor, which of course is beneficial at one level for your campaign, but the other side of that is one of the biggest financial stressors for cities going forward is dealing with the pensions and the ongoing medical expenses of retirees. So what would you say to residents who might be skeptical that after you get all this support from organized labor that then you would sit down, have any involvement with the city's negotiations on this, and be truly representing residents as opposed to your political patrons?
Well, first, I would say that all of our city employees are residents as well, and so there's very many different interests at play. But I'm grateful for the support of our city employees, and that I believe public service works well when there's a partnership between the council members, the mayor, the city employee groups, the city manager, and so it all works hand in hand. And frankly, employees are a huge stakeholder because those are the ones that all of us entrust with, making sure that our streets are clean, making sure that we're adequately protected in the community. And so I don't see it as a problem that I have support from organized labor. The pension obligations and requests for salary would still be prevalent and upfront as an issue, even if I didn't have that support, and it still exists. And so I'm proud to be supported by the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor, the Police Officers Association, and many others, and I view it as a partnership, and I don't see it as any different than a neighborhood association choosing one candidate over the other.
Okay, but do you have the appetite to drive hard bargains on behalf of the city and the city's budget with organized labor in Pasadena?
Absolutely, but again, I disagree with the contention that organized labor or city employees are not partners in city government. They are.
All right. You're very civil with each other, which is terrific, and I think speaks well for the city of Pasadena. But in a direct comparison with your opponent, what do you see as your biggest advantage over your opponent? Ms. Robinson?
Oh, I get that question first.
I think it's your turn, yeah.
Well, I definitely believe that my youth is an advantage, and I believe that I have the right balance of personal experience, being born and raised here in Pasadena, and also my number of years of experience, 8 in fact. Sometimes it's hard to believe that it has been that long, but I have been a member of the city council for the last 8 years. The last 2 years as vice mayor, I believe I've earned a reputation for being hands-on in virtually every corner of this community, and I will continue to build upon that reputation, earned reputation, frankly, of working together with the community and being able to make tough decisions and not necessarily being wedded to any one particular position. I believe that I've been able to listen openly and honestly with different segments of the community and in turn make an informed decision of what I would believe would be the best, not just for District 1 residents, but the city as a whole.
Ms. Tornek, what do you see as your biggest advantage over your opponent?
I think that my life experience, which is the flip side of the age issue, I suppose, I think my work experience, having been a planning director for the city, having worked in private business and being responsible for and completing successfully big projects, both on the public side and on the private side. I think my volunteer experience on commissions, both the Planning Commission and the Design Commission, and I think my volunteer experience on 2 nonprofit affordable housing organizations. I think all of these things, and of course my city council experience, my 6-year experience on the city council, I think all of those things equip me to be able to deal with the kinds of challenges that the city is confronting.
We're time for our 2-minute closing statements based on our coin toss before the start. Ms. Robinson, you go first. You have 2 minutes to make your final statement.
Sure. Well, again, thank you to Pasadena Media and KPCC, Mr. Mantle, for moderating tonight's forum, and all of you for attending here tonight. I was born and raised here in this community, and I view my public service as the payback for everything that this community has helped me develop into to be able to be a member of the city council. I'm running for mayor because I thought that there needed to be diversity amongst the leadership of Pasadena, and after 16 years of Mayor Bogart's leadership, now is a critical time in Pasadena as we look to maintain our past, but also looking forward into the future. I'm honored to be endorsed and supported by many segments of this community, including the Women's Political Caucus, the Democratic Party of Los Angeles, our city employees by way of the County Federation of Labor, and a host of other individuals and organizations. But My most rewarding endorsement would be your vote, and I'm asking all of you for your vote. I've been a very active member of the City Council over the last 8 years. In addition to my service on the City Council, I'm also a member of 3 City Council committees, as well as a commissioner to the Burbank Airport Authority, and the chair of the Foothill Workforce Investment Board. And in my time outside of the City Council, what's left of it anyway, I'm a policy director for Los Angeles Unified School District Board member Steve Zimmer, and my experience with the education system there is going to be very helpful as we grapple with some of our public school issues here in Pasadena, and I'm going to be the greatest supporter and champion of our public school system because I am a public school graduate myself, and I see the many good things that are happening in PUSD and believe that we are currently and we can be an even better public school system here in Pasadena. And so I respectfully ask all of you for your support and your vote on April 21st. And I encourage you, if you need more information about my campaign, to go to my website at JacqueRobinson4mayor.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Pasadena City Council member and Vice Mayor of Pasadena, Jacque Robinson. Council member Terry Tornek, your 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to the organizers and to Larry. And really, thanks to all of you for showing up tonight in the rain, and those of you that are watching as well. But I mean, I think this does demonstrate the kind of commitment that people, your attendance here tonight, and those of you that are watching, your willingness to take time and watch, does make clear how people feel about their city. As many of you know, I've been walking the city for over a year, and I've been listening to what people have to say, and what they say is that they really are very proud to be part of Pasadena, part of the Pasadena family. But many of them are concerned that we're slipping, that we're losing our reputation as really a model city, a city to be emulated by others. And we've talked about a lot of the reasons tonight. We talked about the embezzlement, we've talked about the difficulty in the police department, we've talked about some of the things we haven't talked about is the fact that we are now, we've fired 2 department heads. We have 2 more departments that are searching for department heads, replacements. We've got a city manager that's under fire. So as voters, you're the ones that have to decide who's best equipped to face some of these challenges, all of these challenges and more. The experience question, I don't need to cover that again. I feel that my experience creates a situation where I'm well equipped to deal with these kinds of problems and to help restore Pasadena to its rightful position as a model for other cities to emulate. And on April 21st, you'll have the opportunity to make that choice, to make that decision, and I hope that you will help me to let you make Pasadena great. Thank you very much.
Pasadena Councilman Terry Tornek. These are your 2 finalists for mayor, and of course, we hope that you'll turn out on Tuesday, April 21st to vote or vote by mail in the election coming up. I also would like to thank all the residents of Pasadena who submitted so many of our questions so that we could really have a broad cross-section of our community taking part and not just me asking questions. I appreciate all that excellent help and superb questions that we had from members of the community. If you'd like to stay and talk with the candidates, they're going to stay for a few minutes. Again, if you could make your interactions brief so as many people as possible have a chance to speak to each of them. My thanks to the terrific team at Pasadena Media and the Pasadena Convention Center. Great working with them as well. From all of us tonight from Pasadena Media, have a very pleasant good evening.